Great to have you with us here, both on Facebook Live and on clickondetroit.com, as we continue our conversations from the Mackinac Island Policy Conference here at the Grand Hotel. Now a conversation with Michigan's Attorney General, Dana Nessel. Good to have you with me. Thank you very much for the time.
Yeah, great to be here, Devin.
I want a number of things I want to talk to you about, but first off, you made some of the bigger the news of the day, I thought, earlier today when you announced this about you're giving Enbridge and the governor, really, a month to kind of get this plan together for tunneling under, not too far from us actually here, tunneling under the straits to create a safer way for Enbridge's Line 5 to go through the straits. And if they don't get it together in a month, you're ready to shut them down.
Well, I think it's a little bit of a mischaracterization of what I said.
Okay.
I did indicate to the governor, and we've been in these discussions many times, that I felt it was very important that we move forward on at least the pledge that I made to decommission Line 5. I feel as though every day that pipeline continues to operate is a day that our state is in great peril and in jeopardy of what potentially could be the biggest oil spill that our nation has ever seen. And it'll be devastating on so many fronts to our state. And if anything, my time in office has confirmed all of my deepest fears about the condition of that pipeline. And, you know, the governor wanted an opportunity to engage in these negotiations to see if she could find the most quickest and most expeditious way possible in order to shut down the line. But I had indicated that if those negotiations were not fruitful, and that if I didn't see that they were going to reach a conclusion that was going to involve Enbridge making the assessment that they'd be shutting down the line, then in the month of June I would be moving forward on my promise.
So how did I mischaracterize it?
I didn't say 30 days. I said in the month of June.
In the month of June. The way that you feel about it, as you say every day, that means really 30 days, I think, is worrisome to you then, right? Every single day.
Every day that goes by is concerning to me, and that's why I want to see this happen as soon as possible. I believe the governor feels the same way, and that's, I think, why she engaged in these negotiations to begin with.
Nobody expects you to be a petroleum or hydro engineer, but how do you feel in general about the remedy and this idea that moving it 100 feet beneath the bottom of the lake becomes a safer way forward?
Well, look, you know, I'm not a policymaker, obviously, and I'm here to enforce the law, not to make it. But what I know is that what we have right now is not sufficient, and that is not adequately protecting our natural resources, our drinking water supply, or the Great Lakes. And that is my job. I took an oath to uphold and to defend the Michigan Constitution. Michigan Constitution involves all of those things, and that is my obligation. And what's happening right now with the way that Line 5 is operating and all the deficiencies in Pipeline 5, that is not adequate to protect our interests as Michigan residents. And I do believe it's incumbent upon me as Attorney General to move forward and take any legal avenue that is available to me to decommission Line 5.
Let's move to what's been going on with your investigation into the Catholic Church, one that carried over from the previous administration and has been going on for probably far too long for the taste of many Catholics and non-Catholics alike. But how confident are you that that we have a grasp of how big the problem is, or are you afraid it's much bigger than we realize still?
I'm certain that it's much bigger than anybody has realized. And the thing is, you know, here we've charged only a handful of cases, 5, clergy members that have been charged. And it would be much larger number than that, but for the statute of limitations having run on so many cases, and frankly, a number of cases where the priests are now deceased, so of course they cannot be charged. But keep in mind the fact that this is just from our tip line. We have confiscated through the course of this investigation hundreds of thousands of documents from 7 dioceses in our state. And all we did was we took the tips that came in and we simply utilized those documents to confirm the information that was provided to us through the tip line. We haven't even really started getting to the documents yet.
No.
So what we expect to see are probably hundreds and hundreds of victims, maybe even into the thousands. And my goal, my mission is to hold people accountable if they have committed crimes against children or vulnerable adults, and more importantly, to make certain that we don't have more crime victims that are created as a result of our office not acting on this information. So we want to do everything we can. What's a little problematic is the fact that the legislature has not deemed it appropriate to appropriate even a single nickel to assist us in this massive investigation, which I believe is probably the second biggest investigation ever launched by the AG's office, only second to the Flint cases, probably. So not only do they not think that this is a worthwhile issue for us to properly investigate, but furthermore, both the State House and Senate have proposed massive reductions to our budget. So yeah, that may probably impact how quickly we can get through those hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of documents.
And in a top-down organization like the Catholic Church, how far do you sense your responsibility goes to find the levels of accountability? Where does it go?
Well, I will say that our office intends to charge anyone and everyone that is criminally liable for either having committed a sexual assault or having aided and abetted in committing a sexual assault, no matter who that is.
You mentioned Flint. Can you kind of update me on where you feel like we are on finding the right responsibility and accountability paths through that entire mess?
So of course there are two sides of this. There is the civil side and then the criminal cases. Right. Now we had to build a conflict wall. I could only be on one side or another, and I chose the civil side in part because I had appointed my Solicitor General, Fadwa Hammoud, to work with Wayne County Prosecutor Kim Worthy in terms of investigating and prosecuting these cases. I think that they're both tremendous prosecutors, and they're working very hard to make certain that anyone and everyone that should be held accountable is properly held accountable, but that also anybody who is not criminally responsible, that they are either not charged or exonerated. But on the civil side, I can tell you that we're working very hard at negotiations on this and in moving the cases forward. And what I would like to see is those cases resolved at some point sooner rather than later.
That's what I was going to ask. Can you see the light at the end of the tunnel yet, or does this feel like one of those everlasting gobstoppers that takes so long for families to get some sort of closure on it?
It's obviously taking longer than I think anybody would like it to take, but I do see a light at the end of the tunnel. I've had many discussions with the governor. We've had discussions with the Quadrant on this. I think it's important for people to remember it's not just up to me as to whether or not these cases get settled, and it's not just up to the government agencies that have been sued or even the governor. Any funding for a potential resolution would have to be approved and it would have to be appropriated by the legislature. So it has to also be the legislature that signs on to this. I'm very hopeful that all parties can come together and resolve these cases, and that our state can once and for all put this behind us to the best extent that we're able to do that.
Where's your level of confidence that the people of Flint are being taken care of today, that their health situation is, that we fixed all this?
Right. Well,
or are fixing it. I shouldn't say fixed.
I certainly think that the government that's in place right now is making every effort to do that. Is it enough? I don't know that we're doing enough. When you have so many people who have been harmed in the way that I think many people agree that they have been, there's a lot that goes towards building that trust again, to rebuild that, and I don't think it's an easy thing to do. I can't speak on behalf of the residents of the city of Flint and how they feel. All I can say is that I know that we're trying as hard as we can to make certain that things are made right.
I'd like to talk to you a little bit about abortion. I'm curious just about your general reflections as you watch where we are right now with states that are trying to severely limit rights to an abortion, including we've seen one such measure in Michigan. But where do you think this is all headed?
Well, I think what many states are trying to do, and maybe our own included, is to sort of put Roe v. Wade back at the Supreme Court and to see if they will reassess that law. Now, my own view that I've made very clear is that Roe v. Wade was properly decided, and that women should maintain the right to choose, and that is a medical decision to be made between a woman and her doctor and her family. But I guess what upsets me is that we're focusing so much on this issue that most of us, the vast majority of us, feel it was properly resolved almost 50 years ago. And instead of working on things like, improving our educational system or infrastructure or our roads, for me, it has to do with protecting consumers and ratepayers and making sure that we bring down the cost of medication. And I have various cases that I've filed to try to do that. To have to focus on something that many believe was resolved properly so many decades ago, to have it be rehashed over and over again, I think makes it difficult for us to make progress in this state.
You know your way around the Supreme Court pretty well. Do you feel like it's in play if one of these state questions reaches the Supreme Court? Do you feel like it's in play, or do you feel confident that it remains decided precedential law?
Well, I think all you have to do is look at the words that President Trump used when he was running for office.
Yeah.
And he made it very clear that this was a litmus test for him in terms of who he would be appointing for these positions, and that he would only be appointing judges that wanted to overturn Roe. And now we have a couple more of those justices who have replaced other justices.
Yeah.
I think that some of whom obviously did not share in that philosophy. So whether or not Roe will be overturned, I guess only time will tell. Is it a legitimate concern? I would say it is.
You've no doubt heard from some of your critics who believe that you're painted as the kind of person who would follow your own feelings and intuitions rather than what the law or the Supreme Court even might tell you. What would you do? I guess it's a fair exercise.
Well, I think that anyone who is in a position as a prosecutor has what we call prosecutorial discretion, right? So, for instance, my predecessor, Bill Schuette, never once did he file a case under the prevailing wage law. Not once. And in 7.5 years that was the law while he held office, he didn't file a single case, even though there were a number of civil cases that were filed. So we know that they existed. He just chose not to use the resources of his office.
A law that's on the books.
Same thing with the ethnic intimidation law, which is our hate crime statute. He did not charge that a single time, even though prosecutors all over the state were charging and convicting people under the hate crime statute for having violated that law. Well, I also have prosecutorial discretion, and with the resources that I have in my office, if Roe v. Wade is overturned, I've made it clear that I choose not to utilize the resources in order to prosecute and incarcerate women and their doctors for making a very private, very personal medical decision.
Because the way it's been explained to me, if Roe versus Wade would be overturned, states would go back to their pre-Roe v. Wade laws, and in Michigan, that held that at the time abortion was against the law in our state.
There is a statute that is on the books as we speak that says that it's been rendered unenforceable since 1973 as a result of Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
If Roe v. Wade were to be overturned, it would automatically go back into effect without any legislative action at all.
Lastly, as I mentioned to you as you were sitting down, you have such a wide array of issues that you face every day. I'm curious as to what you're prioritizing and how you decide on the priorities for you and your office right now. What is the biggest thing that you think Michigan is facing that you can control?
Well, my biggest aim was to take the office and revert it back a little bit to the way it operated under Frank Kelly. So we've placed a really large emphasis on consumer protection. So one of the things we've been doing is bringing a lot of cases to try to bring the rate down for gas and for electric. We've saved residents in the state over $300 million just since I took office on gas and electric cases against public utilities. We have a number of consumer protection cases that we've brought. We have actually had settlements just again since I've taken office of $15 million for consumers that were defrauded that have gone back directly to consumers or into the state treasury. We have cases that we filed against pharmaceutical companies who have fraudulently inflated the price of generic medications used for things like cancer and diabetes and epilepsy, because the exponential increase in the rise drug prices, I think is ridiculous, and frankly, it does a terrible disservice to those of us who have to use those important medications,
Yeah.
and it's illegal.
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of things that we're really focusing on. We have an elder abuse task force that we've put together in concert with the Michigan Supreme Court, with a bipartisan coalition of legislators, and also with 80 different organizations that are advocates on behalf of seniors and other vulnerable adults, and we're working very, very hard to make certain that seniors are properly protected. So by the time fall hits, with the new court orders we expect to see in place as a result of this, with the new laws that I expect to see in place, I think that our office will have done more to advance protection for seniors in this state than we've seen in the last 30 years put together.
Well, my last question then, speaking of consumers, I get this question from people all the time, and today is my chance to take it right to the top. If somebody has blown out 4 tires and busted so many rims, in fact, we had a big bill on our car just 2 weeks ago. Can I submit it to the state of Michigan for a repayment because of the shape that our roads are in? I get this question all the time.
I wish I could give you an easy answer. It's more complex as to whether or not the Michigan Department of Transportation was already advised of the fact that, say, that there was a pothole there, and whether or not they were on notice. And if they were, generally speaking, they will be found to be responsible for picking up the tab. If this was a brand new defect in the road or one that they just didn't know about, then they wouldn't be. But the fact of the matter is, it's so imperative that we get the roads fixed already. And I think that's a perfect example. Listen, I'm not a legislator, but I am a driver. I have, my family has a couple vehicles. I have 2 brand new drivers, twin 16-year-old boys.
Yep.
And
I'm sorry, by the way.
all I can say is I think it's hard enough to teach a 16-year-old boy how to drive to begin with, but teaching him how to drive on our roads has been more difficult than I would ever imagine.
But I would have to specifically identify the pothole. I can't say the general condition of the roads or over. I would have to pull it out of a lineup. That's my pothole.
Well, I've never seen a pothole lineup before, but maybe we should start having it. Maybe it's not the worst idea.
Thanks for the conversation, Attorney General Dana Nessel.
Thanks, Evan. Good to talk to you.
You too.